Welcome back, PetaPixel viewers. It is Chris Nichols here, and we're looking at a pre-production Sony 70-200 f4G. Now, it's not a G Master, it's a G, but it is still in white paint, very compact. Look at the tape on there, that's because it's a secret. Let's go play with this lens. And welcome back. Now, as I mentioned before, this is not a G Master, it's a G series, but Sony do make a lot of very professional grade G series lenses. I really enjoyed the original 70-200 f4, but this looks even more compact as a second version. Also, if we sneak a peek under the tape, it does say macro. We're gonna talk about that because this makes this lens even more versatile. It actually has really good 1:2 life-size reproduction for macro throughout the focal range. Now, I've already had an opportunity to shoot this lens a little bit here. We just had Canada Day on July 1st. There was good opportunities to shoot some concert photos there, but I want to do a lot more testing. So let's get to that, get some shots done, and then we'll talk about handling when we return.
I've been contemplating all my time. My thoughts make me tired, just running through my mind. Wonder if there's peace I can find.
Now, even though this is not a G Master lens, it's certainly appointed like a professional 70-200 should be. So starting with the handling, I have to say the manual focus ring right off the bat, pretty slippy sloppy, very loose, not very well dampened, not a huge fan of that. But we do have three nice customizable buttons around the ring here. The zoom itself is a short throw, it's well dampened. I don't feel like it's gonna creep too much, and you can lock it there if you wanna keep lens creep under control. One thing to point out though, the original 70-200 f4, although physically larger, was an internal zoom, whereas this does extend a fair amount as you're zooming. But when it's in your camera bag, it is still nice and compact. Autofocus manual focus selector switch, of course. This does have dynamic manual focus, which you can turn on. So even if you're autofocusing, you just grab that and just readjust it at will. We do have optical stabilization in here and 3 modes that we can set for that. So we've got a focus limiter here on the side of the lens. And of course I can do the entire range, or I can limit it from 3 meters to infinity, but I can also limit it just to macro focusing ranges. And that should avoid a lot of hunting in the focus if you're specifically shooting close-ups. I like that as a touch. Now we do seem to have just a little lip here where an optional collar can be attached. It does not come with that. 72mm filter threads on the front, but you do get a hood with it, of course. And the weight, it's just under 800 grams, so just below half a noct. Actually really manageable to carry around. So we don't talk about what goes on here, probably just some light reading as you can see, but what we can talk about is the weather sealing on the 70-200 f4. So this might not be sealed to the same degree as a G Master, but it's got some dust and moisture resistant. We do have the rubber ring here around the lens mount just to try to keep things nice and sealed. And overall, I think you'd have no problem using this lens in inclement weather or questionable back alleys. So playing with this lens, it actually reminds me a lot, even though they're completely different brands, of the Canon RF series 70-200s. Their 2.8 is more compact, their f4 is even smaller. The Sony version is a little bit larger than the Canon RF, but I will say one strength here that I really like on the Sony f4, I can still put teleconverters on here. I'm not limited in that regard. And remember, even at f4, modern Sony bodies will have no problem focusing even with a 2x converter on there. So I'm shooting at 200mm. I'm testing the macro capabilities. We've got tons of bees here just going all over the places. You know, they're erratic, but we're getting them. I've got some good shots here. But let me just show you the minimum focusing distance here, just to these flowers right here in front of me. You know, that is where we're at. So we're about 5 or 6 inches away from the front of the hood, probably 13 to 14 inches away from the actual sensor plane itself. That's at 200mm. You get the same 1:2 life-size macro regardless where you are on the focal length. But as a versatile option, I like it. I'm not right in on the subject. I get a little bit of room to work with. I'm getting good sharp macro, nice close-ups, and yeah, the Sony autofocus is helping me out a lot. All right, so let's talk about autofocusing on this lens here, because a lens like this, the kind of stuff you're going to shoot with it, sports action, you know, portraits, low light stuff, you want a fast focusing lens. And this is what I'm going to say here. We got twin XD linear motors. We know that these are quick and powerful. And from about 1 meter to infinity, it's very snappy, no problem at all. I would easily be able to capture street stuff, sports, anything like that. But because this lens can focus so close, if I get closer than roughly 1 meter, that's when things actually slow down. Having to focus through the range of something close to something far, it really does slow down. Got to keep in mind, this isn't something you're often going to do, right? How often do you go from shooting something a foot away to infinity and need that to be quick? But do keep that in mind. If you're shooting within close ranges, it's nice and quick as long as you stay close. And if you're shooting things from a regular distance beyond, it's very quick as long as you're shooting things a regular distance to beyond. So let's now talk about Bokeh, and that's that longitudinal chromatic aberration. This is where we look for colors that kind of develop in the foreground and background areas of images that are out of focus. It's because these colors are really hard to get rid of in post if you want to remove them afterwards. So luckily, looking here, we find this shiny object. You can see here, lots of edges, lots of contrast, and we're not getting any sort of color cast. So that's really nice. We don't have to worry about that in post. As far as chromatic aberration goes, very well controlled. This lens, no issues in that regard. Okay, so time to talk about Bokeh on the Sony 70-200 f4. And because this is a full frame f4 lens, you can absolutely get nice shallow depth of field at the telephoto ranges here. So looking at the specular highlights, you can see quite clearly, shooting wide open, pretty prominent cat's eye effect. It actually goes quite a ways towards the center of the frame. When you stop down to f5.6, luckily things still stay nice and round and that cat's eye effect largely goes away, but just something to keep in mind. What is nice though is when you look at the highlights, we're not getting any weird onion rings, not too much of a soap bubble effect with a strong run around the outside. It's quite smooth looking, and so that's why the transitions from in focus to out of focus areas are also quite smooth. So as far as the shallow depth of field lens goes, I think you'll find this pleasant. Well, our weather's transitioned pretty quickly from sunny and bright this morning to hazy and gray this afternoon. But luckily, we did get some flare samples, and pretty much as we expected from modern Sony lenses, flare is not really an issue. I'm not seeing a major loss of contrast when shooting towards the sun or bright light sources. And also, ghosting doesn't seem to be an issue even when stopped down in a major way. Nothing distracting. So, as usual, Sony G lens handles flare very well. So far, the 70-200 is a nice lens to use, but does it sharp good? Well, let's talk about that. So, focusing here in the center at f4, first at 70 millimeters, very impressed with the detail, nice and sharp. When we stop down to f8, you notice the contrast just like slightly more sharp, more detail, but it's very similar. So your upper left corner at f4, here it's just a little bit soft. This definitely improves when we stop down to f8, focusing in that corner at 70 mm. You can see that's really quite usable. And in general, stop down, you're gonna get sharpness across the entire frame. Now at 200 millimeters, it's actually a very similar story, which is good. This lens is very consistent. Again, shooting 200 millimeters in the center at f4, you can see it's the same thing. Lots of detail, really nice clarity right in the center. Stopping down to f8 doesn't really improve things much. When we look at the corners, same story. If we stop down to f8, the corners sharpen up nicely and the lens is beautiful across the whole frame. Now I should mention I'm shooting on the Sony a7R5 today, so that 60 megapixel sensor is pushing this lens to the max, and I'm very happy with the sharpness I'm getting. I would happily shoot this lens at f4, wide open all day long. If I have the light, I'm fine with the depth of field. Stopping down just makes this lens even better. So although the 70-200 f4 that we've been able to play with today is a pre-production lens, we were allowed to test pretty much everything about it. And so I think we can draw some pretty solid conclusions. I mean, this seems to be a very strong 70-200 f4 lens. Absolutely worthwhile to replace the one that came before it. I mean, it's gonna handle high resolution sensors, no problem. It's plenty sharp, it's well behaved, we get nice bokeh, fast focusing at distance, and I do like the fact that we got that close-up capability for extra versatility. So this 70-200 f4G lens would actually pair very nicely with the 20-70 f4G series lens. That would be a really, really nice travel combo to just kind of go around with something light and compact. But it's nice to see that Sony is updating a lot of these lenses that needed updating from the past, and I think we've got a really strong lineup going forward. Leave your comments below, let us know what you think, of course. Subscribe to the channel, like the channel, we'd appreciate that. Instagram, Twitter. If you haven't listened to our podcast already, listen to that. It's right on the channel here or on all your favorite podcasting apps. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll see you soon with more episodes on PetaPixel.